Thank you everyone for coming. I'm Lynnette Macomber. I'm an attorney here at Reno in our litigation department. That means I do lawsuits and court hearings and all that fun stuff. And joining me is Brad Melson.
I'm a member of our corporate and real estate group, where my practice is primarily mergers and acquisitions and general corporate work and business succession planning.
So again, thank you for coming out in the rain to join us this morning. So we're going to be talking about insurance, record keeping, and succession planning for businesses 101. So it's definitely meant to be an overview or a refresher. If it's something that you already know a little bit about, hopefully you'll learn something new. If this is just very, new, something you don't know anything about, I think it'll be a good overview for you today. There we go. Cool. Okay, so the agenda, breakfast is number one on the agenda always.
Good rules.
Yeah. And so we're going to start off with business insurance, and we're going to spend a little bit more time on that because we're joined by our friends from the New Hampshire Insurance Department this morning. And then we'll go into record keeping and succession planning, and then we'll have Q&A in case you have any questions. And if you're joining us online, feel free to send questions through the chat, and we can address those at the end. Thank you. All right, so we'll start with business insurance. And this is just a broad definition. What is insurance? It's really a contract. And most of you know, insurance is represented by a policy. So you have an insurance policy from your insurance company. That's generally the basics of how insurance works. And so what the insurance company is doing is they're going to protect you. If you suffer a loss, they'll reimburse you. If you get sued, they may step in and defend the case for you. They may hire an attorney on your behalf. We're not talking about personal home health and auto insurance or sadly pet insurance today, even though I do love pets. And I just wanted to put a dog in the presentation. So does anyone know the one, and excluding the New Hampshire Insurance Department folks, does anyone know the one type of mandatory insurance that businesses have to have in New Hampshire? No, that's optional, but it's a good guess. And from my perspective as a litigator, I think it's basically mandatory. Any other guesses? Workers' comp? Yes, workers' comp. This was the hint. Sorry, I meant to give you a hint. Okay, so workers' compensation is the one type of mandatory insurance that all businesses have to have. If you have employees that are full-time or part-time. There are some exclusions on the next slide. But basically, if you have any full-time or part-time employees, then you have to have workers' compensation insurance. And what that covers is medical bills for work-related injuries, disability benefits, and then if a worker is killed on the job, death benefits to their family members. Nonprofit organizations are also required to cover employees with workers' compensation. However, sole proprietors, partners, and self-employed persons don't need to have it, but they can elect to be covered. And then corporations or LLCs with 3 or less executive officers or LLC members without any other employees don't have to have coverage, but they can also elect to. As soon as they have that 4th person, then they're going to have to get workers' compensation insurance. Just some basics of workers' comp for businesses to remember. If an employee is injured on the job, then you have to file a first report of injury with the Department of Labor no later than 5 days after you learn of the injury. And then failure to file that first report can result in a $2,500 fine. And then the fine for not having workers' compensation insurance could be $100 per employee for each day where the employer didn't have coverage. So that could definitely add up to a pretty hefty fine. So here's some of the optional insurance coverages. And like we just talked about, needing insurance is kind of like a parachute. If it's not there the first time, chances are you won't be needing it again. And that may be because your business is sued. Litigation costs can really quickly add up. You may spend something like $50,000 to $150,000 in attorney fees. And then if judgment is entered against you, that would be on top of whatever attorney's fees you have to pay out of pocket. Whereas if you have something like liability insurance and they can come in and defend you, you have the policy in place for that coverage. And so that out-of-pocket expense can really make or break a small business. So the first one that most people think of is general liability insurance, and liability is just, lawsuits if you're getting sued for something. So this is really something every business should have. It protects against lawsuits such as bodily injury, property damage, medical expenses, even libel and slander. And again, defending against lawsuits or settlement bonds and judgments against the business.
If I could just jump in here, in my world, a lot is made of, and rightly so, of the corporate veil, basically the idea that if you form an LLC or corporation, that serves as a form of protection against you for liabilities. And that's true in sort of a hypothetical sense, but really I think from a pragmatic perspective, the insurance is always going to be the first line of defense. And we'll touch a little bit more on sort of this idea of the corporate veil a bit later, but really, in the course of forming a new LLC or corporation, the next question is, okay, what are you putting in for insurance, based on the risk profile of the business?
The next one we want to talk about is product liability insurance. So this is really recommended for businesses that manufacture, wholesale, or distribute products. And it protects against losses resulting from a defective product that causes injury to someone or to someone's property. So for examples, I put wine, and the Segway, actually I learned, was invented in New Hampshire. I don't know if anyone knew that. It was invented in Bedford, New Hampshire. And there were several product liability lawsuits against Segway for their product causing injury to people. So product liability insurance is something that would step in and protect you if you're manufacturing a product that causes damage to somebody. The next one is professional liability insurance, and this is something lawyers know well because we have to have it. It's recommended for businesses that provide services to customers. So think of accountants, lawyers, doctors, really anyone that's providing sort of a consulting type service versus manufacturing goods. It protects against losses resulting from malpractice, errors, and negligence. You may sometimes hear it called E&O coverage, errors and omissions. And what that speaks to is just negligent actions and malpractice. So if a lawyer does something negligently and it harms one of our clients, then we are putting our professional liability insurers on notice. Commercial property insurance. So this really speaks to the property that's owned by businesses. If you have a significant amount of property and physical assets, you own real estate and buildings and that kind of thing, it protects against the losses of and damage to company property due to fire, wind, hailstorms, even vandalism. One thing I wanted to flag is that it may exclude flood insurance, and that would be something you might want to consider, especially the summer we've had with all the flooding and the rain. I think that's something people may want to be reviewing their policies to see if they have. Home-based business insurance. This is usually something you would add to your own homeowner's insurance policy as a rider, but it can offer protection for businesses that are run out of the person's own house. And so normally your home insurance will exclude coverage for business-related activities. And so you may want to have this separate coverage that, if you have a work computer at your house or something like that, you would want to have a separate business insurance for that. And then the business owner's policy, I think most business owners probably have something like this. It combines the three really critical types of insurance for businesses: the commercial property, general liability, and then business income insurance.
Yeah, just, sorry.
Oh, no.
Just a question on the business income insurance.
So that is like for business interruption. If there's property damage because your building burns down from a fire, something like that, business interruption insurance may step in and cover the business profit losses that you suffered from that.
That was actually a point that I was going to underscore, that I think that often gets overlooked. People focus on liability and property, but the idea of protecting your income if the business can't run because of a flood, or if there's a disability to one of the key employees, is really just sort of bridging the gap until you can get the operation back up and running and generating income.
Data breach insurance, again, this is usually in the form of a rider, but it may be a separate policy that you can get. This is for cyber liability. If you have a data breach and confidential customer information gets shared, this is the kind of coverage that would help protect you from losses from that. So legal costs if the business is sued for losing confidential or sensitive data, credit and fraud monitoring, and then PR expenses. If you do have a data breach and customers are losing trust in your business, that may be something you would want to consider having data breach insurance for. Commercial, so umbrella insurance generally refers to insurance that's a secondary level above your base level of insurance. And so it's excess coverage above and beyond what a normal liability policy would cover. This may be something you want to consider as your business grows, just having that extra layer of protection. Usually that coverage, goes up much higher in terms of the dollar amount, up to $1 million or more. So commercial umbrella is just to protect against those potentially really big lawsuits that could come against your business. Commercial auto insurance, this is for your business-owned vehicles. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but again, most personal auto insurance will exclude coverage if you're using your vehicle for business reasons. So you want to make sure that if you are using it for business reasons, you have, either commercial auto insurance or hired and non-owned auto insurance. And what this one is for when you drive your own personal vehicle, or if your employees are using their personal vehicles for your business, then this will provide coverage if something happens while they're using their own vehicle. So when you're getting business insurance, these are sort of the 4 steps that you want to take. You assess and then like Brad mentioned, a lot of this will happen, I think, at the outset when you're setting up a business. But if you've already set up a business and you haven't gotten insurance yet, these are the steps you would want to take. You want to assess the sort of risks that your business implicates. So what kind of accidents or natural disasters or lawsuits might your business face? Consider finding a reputable licensed agent. That's really not a recommendation. I mean, I would say that's more of a mandatory requirement. You want to find someone who you trust, who's licensed, and who really understands your business and can help you find the right policies. And then shop around. Knowledge is always power when you're negotiating. If you know what sort of rates, terms, and benefits that other insurance companies are providing, you can compare and contrast and find hopefully a premium that makes sense for your business with the right amount of coverage based on what your risks are. And a good insurance agent will be able to help you do that. And then reassess annually. Make sure your policy is up to date to account for changes in growth. If you just acquired a new fleet of vehicles, maybe you want to look into commercial auto and that kind of thing.
I just also add that, a common question that I field from my clients is, how much insurance is enough? And that's always a really difficult question to answer is like, how do you like to sleep at night, really? What's going to set your mind at ease? I mean, there are certain thresholds that would be, I think, most people would agree would be reasonable, but, I think if you're planning for sort of a worst case scenario and you can find a policy that meets the needs there at a price that is affordable or you feel is affordable or will let you sleep at night, then you may consider sort of going down that road.
So what happens if your business gets sued? Well, first step, contact your attorney if you already have one. But then if you do have insurance, you're going to want to look at your policy. So I flagged a few provisions here you're going to want to look at in your policy. So the first is notice requirements to your insurer. So these govern when and how to notify your insurer of a claim against your business. Typically, you have to notify the insurer as soon as reasonably possible or under the circumstances. But there will be a specific language in your policy about that. And typically you want to do it as soon as possible because then you can get a coverage determination from your insurance company as to whether they're going to cover, whatever claim is being made against you. And then you want to look at the coverage requirements. And this is something I would recommend doing anyway, just being very familiar with your policy and exactly what it covers. and the exclusions. And so a lot of times the policies will say that X, Y, and Z is covered, but then Y and Z are actually excluded at the end of the policy. So you really want to pay attention to those exclusions. And then, like I said, if you are notified of a lawsuit, you want to put your insurance carrier on notice as soon as possible. Because they may decide to hire an attorney on your behalf, and that attorney, then can work with you to get information to defend the lawsuit. So now I want to turn it over to the New Hampshire Insurance Department. I think you're going to talk a little bit about workers' compensation and casualty insurance. Okay. Thank you. Take it away.
Good morning. My name is Emily Doherty. I'm here with my colleagues, Richard Dutton and AJ Pierstad. I'm one of the staff attorneys of the department. I work in the legal division, and I'm the property and casualty attorney. Richard Dutton is the workers' compensation analyst for us, and he works in the property and casualty division. And AJ Pierstad is our department's consumer outreach coordinator and department's communications team. The department is a New Hampshire state agency that regulates the insurance marketplace in the state. If you have questions about insurance, you can reach out to our consumer services division. They can assist at no charge. You can reach them by emailing them at consumerservices@nisnh.gov or calling 1-800-852-3416. You can also learn more about the department at nih.gov/insurance. We're here today and also able to answer questions after the presentation. I've just been asked to just provide kind of a high level overview about some issues you might want to think about when you're insuring your business. A lot of this we already went over. But as it was already said, when it comes to your business, you might have a bunch of different insurance needs. And as was already mentioned, you might need commercial general liability coverage, but business auto insurance coverage, coverage for your commercial buildings, personal property coverage, equipment breakdown coverage, business income protection coverage, cyber coverage, errors and omissions coverage, directors and officers coverage, employment practices liability coverage, employment benefits liability coverage, and other types of coverage such as builder's risk coverage. As the types of coverage that you might need for your business might be really particular to your business. It is, you really might want to consider reaching out to an insurance producer to help you determine what kind of coverages might be best for you and what kind of policy limits might work best for you. You should know that with the exception of commercial auto and fire and lightning policies and workers' comp, which we will speak about, coverages in commercial insurance policies are not statutory driven for the most part. Mostly they're contract driven. So the coverage that's available in a particular policy may vary significantly between different companies. So that's another reason to work with an insurance agent or producer to help you determine if the policy that you're looking at has coverages that you'd like or need. And you also, as was mentioned, want to review your policy to make sure that the coverages that you're expecting are there and include the additional coverages. As already mentioned, most policies are built or structured so that you have the base policy, and then which gives the broad grant coverage, and then that broad grant coverage is reduced or cut back by the definitions and exclusions and sometimes endorsements. Again, that's another reason that you need to review the policy and make sure it has coverages that you're expecting or that you need, and another reason to reach out or work with an insurance agent producer so that you make sure that you do have everything you need for your business. And at this point, I'm going to turn over to Raju, excuse me, who's going to give a brief discussion of workers' compensation insurance. And as I mentioned, we're here for questions here today, and then also feel free to reach out to us at the department anytime. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Good morning. My name is Raju Dave. I'm the workers' compensation analyst at the New Hampshire Insurance Department, and few things were covered about workers' comp. I'm going to repeat those if you don't mind.
Reinforcement is good.
Yeah.
That's why we're here.
So first of all, it is required for all employers to have workers' comp insurance, as it was mentioned. There are a few exceptions which were mentioned as well, like sole proprietors, partners, corporations, LLCs with 3 or less members don't need the workers' comp coverage. But I get a lot of calls that I'm a one-person company or two people in my company, and the company I want to do business with, why are they asking me for workers' comp coverage when it's not legally needed? And that's where it's a little bit tricky for them to understand that anybody you want to do business with can ask you for workers' comp coverage, even though it's not required by law. There are two main workers' compensation laws in New Hampshire, and they both are managed by two different agencies. One is Department of Labor. Their RSA 281A is Department of Labor's law. RSA 412 is Department of Insurance's law. Most of the claims related issues or employee versus subcontractor verification of coverage kind of issues are handled by Department of Labor, and anything policy related or rate related issues are handled by Department of Insurance by us. Excuse me. Let me talk a little bit about the rates, how the rates are done. We use an advisory agency, it's called National Council on Compensation Insurance. I always have to look it up because we call it NCCI, so it's so much easier. It's NCCI that we use to set our statewide base rates by class codes. They also work with 32 different states, so they have plenty of data and other relevant information they need to file for rates on a yearly basis. We review those filings every year before approving them. Our workers' comp base rates have decreased in each of last 12 years. I also get sometimes calls for that, that the rates have gone down. How come my rates have not gone down? There are a couple of reasons. All policies are workers' comp policies. Premium is calculated by classification codes and payroll. So if the payroll has gone up or if the workforce has increased in the company, then they will see higher year-over-year change in the premium. It also depends on the experience, means that if you have a lot of claims, then the insurance will go up even though the rates have gone down. Because workers' comp policies are issued on with this payroll and class code in mind, it's all on auditable basis. So they're called auditable basis policy. So every policy is audited at the end of the policy period by the insurance carrier to determine the final premium. And that is where it becomes a little bit tricky because insurance carriers can ask for a lot of information to do the audits, and some people don't like that. So I get a lot of calls for that as well. But it is neat. So that's why I recommend that everyone should go through an agent or an agency to get this policy, and so they know upfront that audit has to be done and how it is done. When time comes for an audit, the agent, hopefully they will help in that process. And the last thing I wanted to mention is that, and it was mentioned before, that shop around. Workers' comp, New Hampshire is a competitive state, we call it. So if you shop around, you get better rates. Most of the businesses will be able to find coverage in the voluntary market. Means that you don't have any restrictions on going to whichever company you like and find right rates. However, if a business is new or if they have multiple claims in a short period of time, they might not be able to secure coverage in the regular voluntary market. So in that case, NCCI steps in and they will put that company into the assigned risk market. We have 3 companies right now in the assigned risk market where it's randomly by a percentage, it's chosen which company the employer will go with. The other tricky part here is that these rates, assigned risk market policies, are generally, it costs more. So I recommend that every 3 years, once you are in the assigned risk market, every 3 years or so, you want to shop around again and see if you can get out of that assigned risk market. Or if your claims are less, then you want to call a few companies and try to get out of the assigned risk market. The rates will drop substantially if you are successful in securing the policy outside of assigned risk market. That's all I have for workers' comp. Any questions?
I have a more some general question, so from the attorney perspective too. So I'm Julie Boston, sorry I'm late, I'm with SBDC, Small Business Development Center, so we do one-on-one business advising at no cost to the New Hampshire business. So we recommend, so one of my questions is, do you guys have a list of people that you recommend insurance, like, I know you Google and, we keep a statewide list of different insurers and we do it by town because they're statewide. But it's always good to have people that are trusted that you guys might recommend.
So can I answer that from my point of view, that I get every new business when they're told that you need workers' comp insurance, many of them, not every, but many of them do call me, that there is a list of companies. We do have a list of company on our website, but our website gets like and AJ might be able to talk about it a little bit more if you have questions on the website itself, but the way it is set up right now, it's not easy to find that. And each company has something called loss cost multipliers for my workers' comp. And so a company might have 4 different loss cost multipliers, so they will be listed multiple times in there. So it gets very difficult to find a company. I cannot recommend a company. I can guide them to go to that website and you can find companies and start calling them. For agents and agencies, I don't have anything at all. That's my answer. I hope that clarifies it.
Okay. Just because if they're there, you would think that they're kind of reputable, right, on your website?
If they're on our website, that means that they have filed to sell workers' comp with us. And they are reputable enough that if they do something wrong, and if we need to step in, we are able to.
Right.
So yes, that is for sure.
Okay. So another question, go ahead.
No, I think we're sort of similarly limited. I mean, I think a lot of it is relationship based, service providers. We've worked with a lot of accounting firms and insurance agencies, either as clients or as collaborators for various clients. So, I don't think that we can give specific recommendations, but maybe plug, clients into our networks of professionals.
Yeah. No, so another question is, what do you see more out on your end? Do you see a lot of workman's comp claims or insurance, like what do you?
Yeah, well, so I've done a little bit of workers' compensation in the realm of employers who are contesting whether something's medically necessary, essentially. That's really been only my involvement. I do more general liability defense. So I've done a lot of insurance defense work for insurance companies, but not as much workers' compensation. So, and same as Brad, I don't really have a list of agents that I would recommend or anything like that. But I would say definitely shop around and use online reviews to your advantage.
I'll just say also that if you're not sure if a company is legitimate or not, or if they're allowed to offer this plan, you can call the insurance department. We can look in our database for you to make sure that this is someone that is allowed to sell this product in the state. Because we do regulate that.
Yeah, I was gonna say that because you can look up if a company is licensed on our website, and be licensed to sell in New Hampshire. And then also another reason you want to shop around is just because different agents have different appointments with different insurance companies, and that means whether they can sell their products. So different agencies are going to have different agents with different appointments. So you will want to call different agencies because they might sell from different companies and get what's happening.
Just to add one more thing to it, there is a website, and I will not know what is the full form of it, but we use it. Surf is one of the websites that we use. I'm trying to remember the full. I don't think I will remember it because we just call it Surf.
What's the like SU or SE?
SERFF. So Surf is the website that is the one that we use to. So the insurance carriers file in that Surf database for us to review their filing, and it is available to general public to see who filed and if they're approved or not as well. So sometimes you don't even have to call, you can find it there, but you can call. I'm just saying that it's
SERFF.com, surf.com. And it's run by the NAIC, the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, which we are a member.
And there is a link to it on our website, and there's also a link to one licensee on the website.
Right.
Through SBI.
It used to be that somebody had to call us. There was no other choice. But with the new technology, they have set it up that other people can look it up as well.
Thank you. And there's also some other resources here, if you're just looking for more general information about the types of insurance, from the Small Business Administration and New Hampshire's different departments. So now we're gonna move on to record keeping. So business records, why keep them? You want to monitor the progress of your business, you're preparing financial statements, you want to identify sources of your income, preparing your tax returns, keeping track of all your tax deductible expenses, and as Brad mentioned at the beginning, protecting against piercing the corporate veil. I think. Yeah, do you want to talk about piercing?
Yeah, I just very, at a very high level, there's this, it's a concept that's basically a rebuttable presumption that an LLC or a corporation under the law is a person. And this has been sort of the focus of a number of Supreme Court cases in the last 20 years. But it's a person separate and apart from its owners. But the key point there is that it's a rebuttable presumption. There are various factors that go into whether or not this actually holds true, and you can distinguish the owner from the business. Some of those factors are commingling funds or keeping business funds away from personal funds, keeping adequate records for the business, actually running it as a separate entity rather than kind of your personal enterprise. And that's something that we'll sort of emphasize here about ensuring that we're observing the formalities that are required to get the benefit of that corporate liability protection.
And the reason that's important is because if a lawsuit is brought against your business, someone can try to pierce the corporate veil and bring the lawsuit against you personally, if as the owner of that business. And what they essentially allege is that the business is really just your alter ego, and the business is really just you, and so they can go after your personal assets as part of the lawsuit instead of you having that protection of the separate business entity. And so I obviously would prefer my clients to keep everything forever, because when lawsuits happen, we're always trying to get information, and sometimes 1 or 2 emails end up being very important. You just never know which documents are going to end up really being needed for different types of lawsuits. But really the types of records you want to hold on to: gross receipts, purchases, expenses, all of your travel, transportation, entertainment, and gift expenses. Those are obviously types of things you might be claiming on a tax return as a business expense and tax deductible. Keep information relating to your assets, and then employment taxes. The IRS requires that those be kept for at least 4 years. And we're going to get into a few other types of records and how long they need to be kept. For most records, though, 3 years is going to be a good rule of thumb. If there's no specific provision for it, most statute of limitations are 3 years. So generally after that point, you may not be able to be sued. It depends on the circumstances, but I think 3 years is a good rule of thumb. As I mentioned, employment tax records have to be kept for at least 4 years. And then the following types of records should be kept indefinitely, so forever. Audit reports from CPAs and accountants, your insurance policies. You never know when you might get sued over something that happened 10 years ago, and you want to know if there was a policy in place at that time that would have provided coverage. Your legal records and corporate documents, and by corporate documents, I mean articles of incorporation, operating agreement, bylaws, and that kind of thing. Deeds, mortgages, leases, and all property records for your business assets. Retirement and pension information. Tax returns and all the worksheets, as well as the year-end financials, and then any trademark and patent registrations that your business owns. And I'm going to turn over to Brad to talk about corporate records.
Yeah, I mean, just very quickly, both the Business Corporation Act here in New Hampshire and the revised LLC Act require these entities to actually keep various corporate records or LLC records in place as they continue to operate. Just as a general rule, a corporation tends to have more rigid sort of formalities. And so it's actually spelled out, I think on the next slide here, as to what a corporation needs to have effectively in its record book. As Lynn mentioned, it's charter, required votes. It needs to have a list of its shareholders, the bylaws, meeting minutes, and the like. Yeah, even if this weren't required, I mean, it's good business practice to have an organized sort of internal, housekeeping, practice. And it does dovetail also with those corporate veil considerations that we mentioned earlier. The counterpart in the LLC Act is somewhat similar, but the wording's a bit different, and I think that goes to the fact that the LLC itself is a sort of a more flexible, malleable legal entity. It doesn't have the same rigid rules that a corporation has, but I think the basic thrust of it is pretty similar. A lot of this would get captured in an LLC's what's called the operating agreement, effectively its charter document and how it gets managed, how funds are distributed, taxes are paid, and the like. But I think, whether or not you're a corporation or an LLC, as I mentioned earlier, it's good practice to have a record book, or sort of a repository of all these records in one place. I think historically it's been sort of a leather bound binder. Now in the 21st century, almost everything is electronic and online, and that's really our practice now. We used to have sort of a full vault of binders, and we're in the process of transitioning those basically to the cloud. They're much more, it's just more user friendly to be able to access them and distribute them as needed.
Yeah, and they can get taken out by a fire or something like that.
Right.
So it's that extra layer of protection. And I just want to go back, the bottom bullet there, most recent annual report delivered to the Secretary of State. I can't tell you how many times I've looked up a business and they haven't filed their annual report and they're not in good standing. So just a friendly reminder, make sure you're filing your annual reports with the New Hampshire Secretary of State's office.
Question on that. What happens if they're not,
I knew you were gonna ask me that. I don't have it on me. It's not good.
Well, if
There's-
they don't file it for, I think it's almost 2.5 years, the Secretary of State's office will, what's called administratively dissolve the entity. I mean, the business could still be out there operating, but for purposes of the state's records, it no longer exists, and there could be tax implications to that. There could be liability implications to that. And
Piercing the corporate veil.
right, exactly, having the authority to enter into contracts on behalf of a corporation that doesn't technically exist.
Yeah, that would be
It's a pretty low bar. You have to file a one-page report and pay $100
Yeah, I think
to
it's
the state
four.
every year. But Lynn's absolutely right. There are many businesses out there that
I
neglect to
just
file.
forget to do that.
And it's easy just to go on and look it up, and it's April 1st.
Exactly.
So here's some specific retention rules for records. Employers have to keep records of all work-connected injuries and diseases in sufficient detail for 5 years. If you complete that first report of injury and the notice of accidental injury form to the Department of Labor, that constitutes proof of compliance with that rule. But I would still recommend keeping them for at least the 5-year period. You have to keep records of all the people you've employed, including wage and hour records, for at least 3 years. And again, that's under New Hampshire law, but under the IRS rule, all employment tax information, and I would say wage and hour information, should really be kept for at least 4 years. And then I just threw in the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, requires 3 years for payroll records. And the EEOC requires personnel files be kept for at least 1 year after any employee is terminated. And then if a charge of discrimination is filed against the employer must preserve records related to that employee until the final disposition of the case. I don't know if we have any real estate brokers in here, but there is a specific statute that requires principal brokers to preserve records for at least 3 years. Records related to escrow and trust accounts, related to funds entrusted with the broker, relating to a real estate transaction. And similarly, mortgage bankers, brokers, and services also have to keep records for 3 years. Law firms, we have to retain all financial records relating to client representation for a period of 6 years by Supreme Court rule. And healthcare providers have to keep patient records for at least 7 years. So as you can see, there's definitely industry-specific requirements. And if you're operating in a realm that's licensed by or regulated by a state agency, I would definitely say review the agency's rules and regulations to see if they have specific retention requirements. Because as you can see for the healthcare providers, those are administrative agency rules. That's not statutory, but there's still law that has to be followed. So in addition to statutes, you want to be looking to each agency and what their rules and regulations are. If you're operating a business that's regulated by that agency. So healthcare providers and doctors are regulated by the Board of Medicine. And then same thing going back to the Department of Labor regulations. Up at the top, it's a Department of Labor rule that requires those records be kept for 5 years. If your business is faced with a lawsuit, you do need to preserve records. There's a concept called spoliation, and that's when somebody is on notice of a potential claim and they delete evidence or they negligently allow it to be deleted. There can be a negative inference drawn against you if you know of a claim or you should know of a claim and you allow records to be deleted. Sometimes that can result in a negative inference against you in the lawsuit. So as soon as if a customer files a complaint against you or even makes a complaint to you, you want to take steps to preserve all records relating to that transaction or that customer. So you want to identify all employees that have knowledge of the facts and circumstances and instruct them to keep all documents, including emails and phone records. If you have IT personnel, that's especially helpful because they can make sure that emails aren't getting regularly deleted. A lot of companies allow emails to get deleted after 1 year. You may want to, if you know of a lawsuit, you can identify specific custodians or employees that have relevant emails and work with your IT personnel to make sure their emails aren't getting deleted. And then definitely seek advice from your attorney as to what types of records should be preserved based on the nature of the suit. But if you haven't spoken with an attorney, I would just say err on the side of caution and preserve as much as you can. And then if you get sued, what's the last thing you should do? But really the first thing, notify your insurer. All right, any questions on record keeping? All right, so we'll move on to succession planning.
All right.
And this is
So,
Brad's
yeah,
bailiwick.
take my cue here to take this home, and actually, I think we'll be bringing this full circle back to insurance as well. But a good portion of my practice is actually dealing with New Hampshire-based businesses. We have a lot of small, closely held businesses, often family-held businesses, where either the founding generation or maybe a prior generation is looking to move it to the next generation, or they may be looking to sell it or pass it over to a key employee. But this is really a much broader topic, and given our time constraints today, we're going to home in on this concept of a buy-sell agreement as sort of a working succession plan. So really, we're trying to guard against or maintain the continuity of the business in response to either a planned transition or unanticipated events or predictable events, but you just don't know when they're going to happen. Really, the goal is to preserve the value of the business, the goodwill, basically the value above and beyond just the base assets of the business, be it the name, the machinery, the vehicles, things of that nature. It's something that is never too late until it is too late. I think most people think that this is something to address after you've been in business a long time and you're looking to retire, but sort of the best laid plans are actually put in place at the outset and then continually updated over time as circumstances and things change. So in that sense, it's kind of a contingency plan. Just to jump ahead here. So this idea of the buy-sell agreement, typically this would be integrated into an LLC's operating agreement, or it'd be a standalone agreement for a corporation. And I would argue that it should be sort of a centerpiece to any formation of a new company that has 2 or more members. Really, at its base, it does 2 things. It implements what are called transfer restrictions, basically dictating who can transfer their shares and how. The idea there being that, if you start a business with a partner or 2 partners, you're entitled to pick your partner. You don't want one of those 3 or 2 people to then gift their share to their brother-in-law or their son. It's really to preserve the original core group of founders. The other piece of this is fixing the terms of the purchase and sale of an owner of a business, is stake in the business upon various events. I mean, life happens. So really, the five major sort of triggering events that would precipitate, a purchase and sale would be death, disability, the termination because one of the members DLC or one of the stockholders really isn't pulling their weight. If a court due to bankruptcy or divorce basically transfers a member's ownership interest to a third party, maybe a spouse or to a creditor, or even if there's a sort of a deadlock or a disagreement among stockholders or members that they just can't overcome. And so that's where these buy-sell rights come into play. So there are two basic structures that we would see in these types of agreements. One would be a cross purchase, where one of those five triggering events basically is deemed an offer by the person either suffering the event as an offer to sell his or her interest to the other stockholders. So this could be an elective option, or it could be mandatory. It could, or the converse to that would be that the company itself would purchase the interest and basically retire. And so if you think of this in the context of, say an unexpected death of one of the key employees, a founder, it allows that founder's family basically to derive value from the business, and then gives the surviving member, if you had a two-person team, to then take the reins of the business and effectively operate it as a sole owner going forward. Basically, it's intended to give a roadmap for if these contingencies happen and allow it to efficiently sort of work through and continue on as a going concern. Other aspects that would typically be addressed would be, how is the interest valued? There are a number of approaches on this. Appraisal is tried and true, but sometimes, given the nature of the business, the individuals will agree on a formula based on sort of historical performance of the business, or they may just pick a number and say, this is what the business is worth. And, could be updated periodically. In terms of the actual payments, as you can imagine, if someone dies unexpectedly, and then all of a sudden either the business or the surviving equity holder is required to effectively buy them out, no one's necessarily prepared to, reach into their own pocket to make those payments. So usually there's either a combination of cash upfront, or more commonly a promissory note, basically the opportunity to pay over time, which stretches the obligation, makes it more manageable for the survivor and the company, while still transferring the value to the person that suffered the triggering event. And where ultimately we're going to dovetail this back to the outset of our discussion, is that insurance can be actually a very critical piece of this, particularly in protecting against death and even disability, although I think premiums tend to be a little bit higher. But there's this concept of key person insurance, basically, where either the other shareholders or more commonly the business itself will take out a insurance policy on someone that contributes greatly to the viability of the business, either creatively, managerially, or otherwise. So there's no real sort of set definition of the key person, but the life insurance tends to be quite affordable, particularly for younger individuals. Disability typically has higher premiums, but I would say could be invoked more commonly. And really, as I mentioned, the idea is to give either the business or the remaining owners liquidity to respond to the disruption in operation and fund the obligations, under the buy-sell agreement. So really, that's the sort of a quick and dirty, overview of this idea of buy-sell agreements, but it's also just kind of another overlay as we're considering various insurance needs of a business that may not be anticipated in sort of the conventional sense.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think succession planning, like Brad said, it's like insurance. It's something you want to plan ahead for and not be left holding the bag, so to speak, if something does happen. I think that's our last slide. And again, I managed to put another dog in. Any questions on any of the topics? I know we covered three seemingly disparate topics today, but again, hopefully you picked up something new. Do you have any online questions?
No, not right now, although anyone who's online, you can also feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question as well.
Should also extend the invitation to certainly, email us directly if you have any follow-up questions. Be happy to address them.
Yeah, feel free to email us. Our contact information. I left a business card over here that you can grab, or add me on LinkedIn and send me a message. I'm happy to provide the slides to anyone that needs them. And yeah, sure. Do I just give you you have a card? Okay, thank you. Thank you everyone for coming. I really appreciate it. Thank you everyone who joined online.